Black Myth Wukong, stary, co ty gadasz? Black Myth Wukong nie jest nominowany do Game of the Year? Co ty gadasz?
Ever so often, there's a game that comes out that meets and exceeds the expectations of the players. It blows our minds. It's so good, but for some odd reason, it doesn't meet the same expectations for games media. Our interests aren't aligned. Our perspectives are not necessarily the same, and there's conflict in that. And I think that Black Myth Wukong is one of those games. And don't get me wrong, the game reviewed very well. It got over an 80 on most review sites. But with that said, up until the game's release,
nie, naprawdę, Black Myth Wukong się nie znalazł w Game of the Year. Jest już jakieś głosowanie? Mogę zrobić na streamie?
Whatsoever, and in that, the game never really got a fair shake. At least not in my eyes. Now, 2024 has been an absolutely...
Nie, no dobra, czyli tak, nominowany do Game of the Year pewnie będzie Dragon Age, który sprzeda 1 000 000 kopii i w dobrym momencie zapauzowałem. Dokładnie tak się czuję, jak na to patrzę. Black Myth Wukong, który sprzeda 10 milionów kopii? Nie będzie, nie? Nice.
Insane year for games. There are so many great games to play, and if you're one of those people that are out there that are like, gaming is dying, let me be the first to tell you,
ciekawe, czy Stellar
you
będzie,
need to play more games, or just not the same ones over and over again. The list, once I get into some of the Game of the Year contenders, it's going to blow your mind because I honestly forgot how many games even came out this year. This isn't about the award. It's about the recognition that these studios deserve, the reward they deserve beyond just making money. It's making sure that it's known why these games are great so that other publishers and studios can see, hey, this is what it is. This is how we make a game that the players love. And it's not, again, just not the money. Already, I'm starting to see games media want to preemptively push back about Black Myth Wukong being in the Game of the Year category, and we're going to talk about that. Before that, today's sponsor. War Thunder, thank you War Thunder for sponsoring this video. We have had a monstrous year in games, and it's wild to think that it's not even over yet with more releases.
2024 był fenomenalnie dobrym rokiem. Naprawdę wyszło dużo fajnych gier.
Right around the corner. This is about the time of year that Game of the Year candidates are being discussed and debated, and this year we have a lot of difficult choices to make. Dragon's Dogma 2, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Helldivers 2, Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door, Prince of Persia The Lost Crown, Persona 3 Reloaded, Metaphor ReFantazio, and Silent Hill 2 Remake are among the highest scoring games that we've had from reviewers this year. That's 8 games when only 6 games can be qualified as candidates. We're not even mentioning the stockpile of games that were scored just under that, with titles like Stellar Blade, Black Myth Wukong, Tekken 8, Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, Unicorn Overlord, Space Marine 2, and more. 2024 has been packed with games, but only a few titles are deserving of being crowned King of the Year, and for many players, that game is Black Myth Wukong. James Throtton of The Gamer penned an article titled If Black Myth Wukong...
Kurde, ja to powtarzam cały czas. Jeżeli ja miałbym wybrać grę roku 2024, Stellar Blade deklasuje wszystko. Na poziomie artystycznym, na poziomie gameplayowym, na poziomie wprowadzania czegoś nowego, mieszanie gatunków. Kurwa, nawet mieszanie gatunków muzycznych. Przecież to, co się dzieje w soundtracku Stellar Blade, to też jest giga dobra akcja. No nie, Stellar Blade to Wukong był fajny, ale nie wydaje mi się, żeby Wukong zasługiwał na miano gry roku. Ta gra ma faktycznie momenty, w których jest niedociągnięta i to widać. No zimowy biom, 3. akt, no jest już przedłużony bardzo, ale to bardzo mocno. On fajnie wygląda artystycznie, mi się podoba, ja nie mówię, że to jest zła gra, ale Stellar Blade definitywnie deklasuje Wukonga, no nie?
Isn't nominated for Game of the Year, fans are going to be insufferable. James writes, Black Myth Wukong is a very good action game, taking the Souls-like formula and stretching it into a boss rush format. Its popularity even surpasses that of its inspirations, garnering millions of players in mere days. It's a genuine contender for the Game Awards, but with how stacked 2024 is shaping up to be, competition is fierce. Polygon recently updated its Game of the Year frontrunner list, while the Golden Joystick Awards announced its 6 nominees for this year's PC and console Game of the Year categories. Black Myth Wukong is nowhere to be seen outside of smaller categories, and so TikTok right now is a deluge of angry gamers declaring that games media is corrupt and that it's all a part of some wider conspiracy. The game was not rigged from the start, it's just been a very, very competitive year. This week alone, we've had Silent Hill 2 Remake, Metaphor ReFantazio, and Dragon Ball Sparking Zero, 3 critically acclaimed hits that are all vying for the spotlight with equal fervor. Earlier this year, we saw the launch of Astro Bot, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, Tekken 8, Helldivers 2, and Dragon's Dogma. That's not to mention the stellar year it's been for indies. Black Myth Wukong, while good, we scored it 4 stars, just doesn't measure up to the greats. Hell, it's not even the best Souls-like this year, as that award goes to Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree.
Delcek, nie?
For those that have used Wukong as fuel in a
Shadow
culture
of the
war
Erdtree.
since before it was even released, its absence on these lists is an attack. It's a ploy by games media for reasons, even though it has an open critic aggregate of 82. There's one big argument cropping up across Reddit and slowly replacing all the goth girls on my
Ale nie
For
wiem,
You.
mnie tak wkurza odwoływanie się do ocen krytyków, wszyscy jest bez sensu. We większości gier oceny krytyków wynoszą 80 lub okolice. No przecież idąc z tym tokiem rozumowania, no to Outlawsy tam dajmy, bo Outlawsy osiągnęło 80 ileś. Albo Starfield, albo Diablo 4, nie?
Page as to why it deserves to be nominated. It sold well. James, I will speak for those that you are arguing against. Black Myth Wukong doesn't deserve to be nominated because of its sales. It deserves to be nominated because it is the first ever release from a studio, an inexperienced studio, that made a stunningly gorgeous game with great combat, a compelling story, beautiful music, incredibly detailed and culturally
Nie no, na
accurate
pewno
environments,
zasługuje na
some of the
możliwość
most
głosowania na
unique
niego.
boss encounters I've seen in a game like this, and themes that we don't often see in games. It was original, fresh, and most importantly, fun. And while many of the games that were mentioned in this article are incredible games, they are just copies of previous titles or even remakes. The industry should be celebrating and rewarding studios that work this hard, take a risk, and deliver something altogether new. And we're not even mentioning how the game sold at a fair price. I am so exhausted by this. Do you want to know why players think there's some grand conspiracy? Do you want to know why they think there's some media bias? Well, you're not doing yourself any service when you try to minimize the game at every given turn. You called it a Souls-like. It's not even a Souls-like.
Outlawsy 75. Teraz porównajmy średnią ocen Outlaws 75 do średniej ocen Black Myth Wukong 82. To jest 0,7 punktów różnicy, a jak bardzo te gry się różnią od siebie. No i to pokazuje, jak bardzo bez sensu są oceny krytyków.
Like, I actually did the same thing in a video too, so I'm actually not going to take points away from you for that, but I don't understand where this idea that this game somehow became something that the culture war LARPers had latched onto even before its release, because to my recollection, the only thing that I can remember is games media were the ones that were pushing these allegations from IGN against game science through different articles. And then also at the exact same time, there were a ton of people pining over tweets that were completely mistranslated. If anything, it was games media that was dragging this game into the culture war, not the other way around. It's just not true. The entire time before this game's release, and this is the reason why I say the game didn't get a fair shake, is that every single time this game was brought up, it was always with a qualifier. Black Myth Wukong is a fantastic action game, but there was this report from IGN that was also based on some mistranslations, but we don't really care about that much. But anyway, they said some things, or they do some things we don't necessarily agree with. Black Myth Wukong, we're giving an 8 out of 10, but just to let you know, we saw some tweets that were also mistranslated, and we didn't really like exactly what they said or the things that this company
Ale
stands.
jakie to ma znaczenie, co wypisywał szef firmy u siebie na Twitterze? Przecież to jest totalnie nieistotne w kontekście tego, jak dobra jest gra.
For. It was always like that. The game never got a fair chance, at least in the media light. And that's not the same for every other game that was out there. All the rest of the games never
No
had.
nie wiem, sorry. Idąc z tym tokiem rozumowania, to wystawmy jakąś skalę moralną, na podstawie której będziemy rozliczać studia, czy mogą być nominowane do czegoś. Nie, ja proponuję, niech w skali będzie, czy weganinem jest twórca gry. A jeżeli nie, to go trzeba usunąć. Potem niech musi być przynajmniej z jednej mniejszości mieć jedną chorobę jeszcze wrodzoną. To dopiero wtedy będzie mógł być nominowany. No przecież do takich absurdów powoli dochodzi. Już nie oceniamy, jak dobry ktoś zrobił produkt, a co on wypisuje na Twitterze, jaką on ma dietę, czy on jest z mniejszości, czy nie jest z mniejszości. No,
Any of this kind of stuff. And the worst part is again, all of these things were alleged, never even proven, yet they were touted as fact. They were included in game review videos, pen reviews. You don't think that's too far? What do you think is the purpose of that when you put that stuff into an article other than to minimize the game and hopefully steer players away from buying it? That's the point. You want to understand and know why players think there's some grand conspiracy? Well, it's not hard for them to jump to that conclusion when it's staring them 2 inches from their face. On the topic of the game's sales, the writer continues with, it's hardly a compelling defense, but sales figures have long been used as evidence that Supposedly anti-woke games like Wukong are what your everyday gamer really wants. In reality, it was a success because
To nie jest tak, że gracze chcą gry, która jest anti-woke. Gracze chcą dobrej gry. Baldur's Gate nie jest ani anti-woke, ani woke. Ma elementy, nie wiem, homoseksualne albo jakiś niebinarny i nikt nie ma z tym problemu, bo jest to jakoś normalnie zaimplementowane w grze.
the game was marketed to the enormous untapped Chinese demographic. It was only made worse when streamers were supposedly sent guidelines asking them not to mention feminist
Tak, no
propaganda
właśnie to jest tak, anti-woke, nie jesteś z nami, to musisz być przeciwko nam. No nie wiem, tymczasem ja obciągałem temu Elitidowi, nie?
or politics. Black Myth Wukong
Orkiem.
became the poster child for the most toxic, vocal gamers on the internet, and everything since its launch has only worked to further that image. Wukong was a monumental hit. There's no denying that. Within days, it skyrocketed to the 7th most played game on Steam of all time, with a peak concurrent player count of 2.4 million players, but numbers aren't everything. Banana, the viral clicker game that generates Steam Marketplace items, has a higher 24-hour peak than Black Myth Wukong right now by over 100,000 players. Avengers, Infinity War, and Spider-Man No Way Home are among the highest grossing films of all time, but they didn't walk away with the pinnacle Oscar for good reason. Sales do not equal quality, but Black Myth Wukong has been weaponized in a culture war ever since it was announced, and it doing well has only been used as ammunition to argue that games media is out of touch with gamers. Not being nominated for any Game of the Year awards, it's October, it's likely going to be in the mix for a lot of sites, and still could be up for many categories at the Game Awards, is just
Nie
one.
no, się zgadzam z tym, no, że faktycznie to jak produkt dobrze pójdzie w sprzedaży, to jak szeroko się sprzeda, to nie jest jeden z wyznacznik tego, czy gra jest dobra i jedyny, a to jest jeden z elementów, który powinien być wzięty pod uwagę. No i w sumie to tyle, a Wukong jest dobrą grą finalnie, a do tego się świetnie sprzedał, więc ja bym chciał posłuchać, jaki jest kontrargument względem tego, a raczej argument względem wykluczenia go z Game of the Year, bo nie rozumiem, jaki jest tutaj argument. Gra była popularna, to nie jest jakaś no-name'owa gierka, gra miała duże pokrycie w sieci, gra finalnie okazała się dobrą grą.
More fuel to prove that point. It hasn't upset fans because they think it's a good game deserving to be among the best. It has upset fans because they see its absence as an attack in their one-sided feud. As we edge nearer the big celebratory end-of-the-year closer that is the Game Awards, we are going to see this outrage spiral. If Black Myth Wukong doesn't get a nomination for the main award, it has a few competitors to shut out in Best Action, its fans will see that as a personal slight. We're witnessing it already, and I've seen my colleagues get attacked over the past year just for covering the game. If fans are this riled up by an award ceremony many self-proclaim they've never heard of, or a list of frontrunners that means very little, then I can't see being snubbed from the Game Awards going down well. Man, the lack of self-awareness when saying that the sales of the game were used as ammunition in a culture war, while you yourself are focusing purely on the sales of the game to minimize the entire discussion around the game. That's interesting. It's convenient to go after the outrage of those who can't voice their concerns properly because the writer is absolutely right. Sales does not mean a game should be Game of the Year. If sales were the leading factor, then Baldur's Gate 3 should have lost to Hogwarts Legacy, or Call of Duty should have won for 5 years straight since it was the best-selling game since 2017. There are a slew of other factors here that should be discussed, but the writer and other media pundits aren't taking the time to discuss that. They're just hand-waving the angry gamers and throwing it out into the bin with the rest of the culture war commentary. Now, my question is, why is it that on the topic of game sales, the Chinese player base is used to minimize the overall impact of the game's sales, success, and popularity? Again, to quote the writer, the game was a monumental hit. There's no denying that. Only to follow it up with, but it succeeded because there was an untapped Chinese market of players. Like, those players don't even count? Why aren't we having a discussion on why, censorship aside, Western games haven't been able to penetrate that market as effectively as Black Myth Wukong, especially when there are that many players that could make that much of an impact on a game's sales? Black Myth Wukong is just as deserving as any other title that could go up there for Game of the Year. That's not saying that those games aren't worthy either. They are. But the thing is that it just feels like the coverage around this game, the discussions around this game, have just felt off. Purposefully dishonest in a lot of ways. Black Myth Wukong was incredibly popular. It was incredibly popular with the Chinese because it was the first game that really represented their culture and history in a way that could bridge the gap between nations. Players around the world loved it. They connected with it. And because of that, it brought down cultural boundaries. We don't see that very often. It should be something that everybody should be cheering for and
To
happy.
nie było tak, że to była gra, która poszła świetnie w Azji, a u nas nikt o niej nie słyszał. Wręcz przeciwnie. Ona miała bardzo dobre pokrycie w naszych mediach i w zachodnich.
That is the power of this hobby. That is what it can accomplish at times, but we're losing sight of that. I think this all loops back to the fact that game science did not bend the knee in fealty to games media when they started hurling accusations at them, baseless accusations at them, and demanded an answer. They said no comment. That has nothing to do with the game or anything else right now, and they didn't feel that it was in good faith, and they just ignored it entirely. And I think that games media as a whole took offense to that. They didn't like that too much. They don't like it when their power and position is questioned, when their authority, or what little they have left of it, is questioned.
Właśnie,
this should be a game that we should be celebrating because of the fact that it broke down cultural boundaries. Beyond that, it was a game that was absolutely gorgeous. It was coming from a studio that this is the first game that they were releasing. It came out relatively polished, fresh feeling combat, boss encounters that we've never even seen before, with attack stylings we haven't seen, environments we've never been in, atmosphere that was absolutely fantastic. They went out and they scanned real life statues and architecture to try to make sure that the game had the most, authentic rendition possible, and they delivered on it. The game was absolutely incredible. The stop motion animations, the anime cutscenes, and a bunch of different style of art. It was great. It was such a good game. But all of that isn't being discussed. Instead, it's all locked behind social politics. Black Myth Wukong was nothing short of a revelation for me. The game was a breath of fresh air in a world.
Ale zobaczcie, że to dochodzi do takiej sytuacji, że gra jest skancelowana z uwagi na to, że nie posiadała ideologii, którą wielkie firmy chcą sprzedać i tyle, nie? To jest niesamowite.
World that is drowning in microtransactions and endless live service models. Much like Baldur's Gate 3 and Elden Ring, it was just a straightforward video game that focused on delivering a great experience without the baggage of modern gaming trends. Selling it at a fair price really made it shine as a prime example of what players have been craving, a complete, immersive experience that doesn't feel like it's constantly trying to upsell you. Like I said before, honestly, it's just a damn good video game. I'm not a professional reviewer, but playing Black Myth Wukong was an awe-inspiring journey for me that I can't stop thinking about. From the moment that I started, I was blown away by its visuals, its gameplay, its music. Every single boss fight felt exhilarating, and I found myself savoring every single moment rather than trying to just rush and finish the game. It's a game that didn't just entertain, it resonated on a deeper level, reminding me why I fell in love with video games in the first place. Now, with that said, the other games that are out there are genuine contenders. I don't want this video to come off like Black Myth Wukong should be the only game of the year and no other game deserves it. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was absolutely phenomenal. Well, I know that there's some people out there that think the game doesn't deserve a spot because it's a remake. It's not. It's a full-on reimagining. The combat, the storytelling, how events play out, the music, the atmosphere. All of it makes for a game that's deserving of the crown. Helldivers 2, despite its controversies, was for all intents and purposes the game to beat this year. It sold tens of millions of copies. It felt like a trip back to the old days of Halo 2 and Halo 3 post-launch, where friends are asking when you're going to get on, you're staying up way too late playing the game, and all you could do was think about what was going to happen in the game next. I just recently started playing Metaphor ReFantazio, and I'll be honest with you guys, it's likely this year's game of the year. It makes huge improvements in turn-based games. It has music that has no right being as good as it is. The set pieces and art direction go from breathtaking to nightmare-inducing, and it has character writing and stories that show quality, care, and the authenticity that players have been complaining for years that game studios can't touch without ham-fisting those themes in. It is the perfect example of how to do topics like diversity and inclusivity the right way. I just want to emphasize that this isn't about one game deserving a title over another. Every title mentioned has its own merits and fan bases, and they're all worthy of recognition in their own right. Black Myth Wukong, however, stands out for its originality and its cultural significance, but also for how this game has been.
Nie wiem, to jest takie pojebane, bo faktycznie ta gra ma duże znaczenie kulturowe. Ona bardzo dobrze sprzedaje kulturę Chin jako gra komputerowa. No przecież to idealnie się wpisuje w standardy, wiecie, promowania mniejszości. Okej, Chiny nie są mniejszością, ale pokazują nam coś, czego no my na przykład w Europie nie widzieliśmy, nie? Coś, z czym nie jesteśmy zaznajomieni, coś, z czym Amerykanie raczej nie obcują na porządku dziennym i coś takiego jest kurwa
Mishandled by the
wykluczone.
media. It's a testament to how hard game science worked on their game and the fresh perspective that they bring. After all, that's what games should be about, creating experiences that are resonating and bringing us together, not just the ones that fit into a narrow definition of success that is made up by a handful of writers. You know, I'm starting to realize that access journalism doesn't work in both ways. You know, because they want to make sure that they're trying to stay in line, that they're doing their best to be able to hold on to their contacts, their insider information, get their keys and their codes, and make sure that they can hold on to their jobs and their relevance. But on the other end, when it comes to some of these smaller studios and publishers, they desperately need the help of games media to be able to be noticed, to get in the front of the eyes of players in the first place. Get their trailers out there, get some articles written and things like that, get them in the algorithms and whatnot. And
Tak jakby Polacy zrobili grę o pijanym starym, który leje rodzinę. No, to prawda, to prawda. To też jest nasze dziedzictwo
I
kulturowe.
think that some of these journalists that are out there view that as an opportunity for them to throw their weight around. That's where they get to be the bully this time. They get to push everybody else around and tell them the way that it's going to be. And I think that Black Myth Wukong stood in opposition to that, and they didn't like it too much. And it might not be all of them. I'm not going to say it's every single one of them. There's some damn good journalists that are still out there. I know you guys are probably shaking your heads. No, there's no way. Believe me, they exist. I have a few of them that are out there that are some of my favorites. But with that said, I think that's the case here for Black Myth Wukong. You know, it's not about sales and it's not about scores. It's about fairness and image. And I just do not think, under any circumstances, that Black Myth Wukong was.
No, słuchajcie, taki jest stan obecnej branży growej, no nie? Widzicie, jak bardzo ona
in the
jest
same colors
skorumpowana.
as some of the other games that
Dzięki
we've seen
Gramowa
this year.
wyzaprawiła.
Even games that had controversy. Pal World, I mean, that game got absolutely shredded by games media. They hated that game, even though the players liked it. But even still, then I don't feel like the game got dogged on this hard. Going back, Helldivers 2, they went through their entire controversy. Games media didn't even want to touch it. They didn't even want to talk about it. They just brought it up slightly and then walked away from it. Just let the gamers be mad. And I think the reason
Która
why
gier
is
będzie
because they just
największą porażką tego roku? Concord, Dragon Age, Skull and Bones, Outlawsy, Dragon's Dogma jeszcze była.
didn't see it from our perspective. They didn't care to see it from our perspective.
Nie
Which
no,
then
na
brings me
Concord na
around
pewno
to this
największa
idea
porażka.
that when it comes to a game like Black Myth Wukong or maybe even like Space Marine 2, probably less so on that one, I think that there are some writers, some journalists that are out there that see that these
Inquisitor
games are
tego
being
roku?
used in a culture war,
Nine
that they are
Awakening też było
diametrically
dobre.
opposed to whatever the side of that culture war is, and they do not want to give them a win under any circumstances, and that does affect their review at the end of the day. They don't want to hand that over to them. They know that they're going to use it as ammunition against them, and they're never going to hear the end of it, and as a result, well, points get docked, the image of the game gets smeared, and this is the result that you get. I don't know if that's going to be the end result of all of this, but it looks like it is. One thing the reviewer, the writer, did get right, there's a lot of games to be vying for a spot as Game of the Year this year. A lot of games deserve it. We've had some awesome games release, and there's still more that are right around the corner. Stalker 2 is, I think, next month. We just had Call of Duty. Black Ops 6 just came out recently. That game got reviewed really well. It did really well. The players seem to really like it, which is crazy for a Call of Duty game, but I mean, stranger things have happened. So who knows? Maybe there's something else that's sleeping in the wings that we don't know that's going to come out and get a bunch of 10s and 9s. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Make sure to share the video with your friends.
No dobra, no dobra. W sumie, czy kogokolwiek to dziwi? Mnie nie. Mnie szczerze nie.